Welcome to this ministry video from Muswell Hill Baptist Church. And before we go any further, can I remind you to subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and also to like the video. If you like the video, it just helps to make the videos more visible on the internet. Therefore, remember that formerly you who are Gentiles by birth and called uncircumcised by those who call themselves the circumcision, remember that at that time you were separate from Christ, excluded from citizenship in Israel, and foreigners to the covenants of the promise, without hope and without God in the world. Paul's writing to the church at Ephesus, and Ephesus was one of the great cities of the Roman Empire. It has been argued that in some of the eras it was the second city of the Roman Empire after Rome itself. But even though the people of Ephesus were very closely linked into the Roman Empire, in this great city, the problem they had, though they had not realized it, was they were separated from Christ, the Messiah. Jesus was the Messiah. He was born in the story we think of at Christmas time. He was crucified. He rose from the dead. He ascended into heaven. Jesus of Nazareth. But they'd never heard of him until Paul and others came to preach the good news. They were separate from Christ, separated from the Messiah. It's possible today to be all over the world, to be all over the internet, but to be separated from the Messiah. Paul goes on, excluded from citizenship in Israel. Well, of course, the Ephesians wouldn't have minded that before they became believers. But citizenship in Israel, being part of the ancient people of God, is fundamental to being linked to the Messiah, who comes from the people of God. The whole of the story of the Old Testament, from the days of Abraham, and especially from the days of Moses, is a reminder that God has a special purpose for his people, his ancient people. And it is through that family of people, and you can see some videos on this channel about the story of Abraham. It is from that family that the Messiah is going to come and be the king of the whole world. So to be excluded from belonging to the people of God in the ancient covenant, to be outside of Israel, is a bad place to be. But of course the Ephesians wouldn't have wanted to be part of the people of God until God worked in their heart. After all, Jerusalem, for example, though it's quite famous today, was a real backwater in the Roman Empire for much of the time, and never anywhere near the significance of Ephesus. So why would you care about being excluded from citizenship in Israel? Well, they didn't. But now, as Paul reflects back on what God has done in their lives, he points out to them that this was where they were. Foreigners to the covenants of the promise. For you see, God made his promises to and through his ancient people. And the promises come to their fulfillment in the Messiah. And so to be separated from the Messiah and to be excluded from citizenship of Israel meant that you were far away from the promises of God. You didn't know about them, you didn't care about them, and you weren't going to be part of the fulfillment of them. Here's an example of a covenant promise from Psalm 103. As a father has compassion on his children, so the Lord has compassion on those who fear him. For he knows how we are formed. He remembers that we are dust. As for man, his days are like grass. He flourishes like a flower of the field. The wind blows over it, and it is gone, and its place remembers it no more. But from everlasting to everlasting, the Lord's love is with those who fear him, and his righteousness with their children's children, with those who keep his covenant and remember to obey his precepts. You see, it was a great thing to be part of the covenant, the agreements of God. And this was something that the Ephesians had not been part of, knew nothing about. They were part of that vast world which we are at first all part of, where we live and we die and we're gone. And so Paul summarizes the situation that they had been in, the Gentiles, the nations, the people of other lands at Ephesus, as this: without hope and without God in the world. Of course, that raises the issue about what do we do when people don't care that they are without hope and without God in the world. Well, the first thing is that if you are a believer, then you should care about the people who don't care. And this was what sent Paul on his missionary journeys to places like Ephesus. Because people who are living their lives towards nothing at all are being wasted. They are lost, and they do not understand the glory that awaits them if only they will believe. So it is incumbent on those of us to whom this light has dawned to care about those who are around us, but who do not care for themselves or for others, that they are without God and without hope in the world. And we should share from what we know. If we have found what it is to know Christ, if we have been brought into the covenants of promise, if we have been made citizens of God's ancient people by his grace and his goodness, then we want other people to know. But in the second part of what we're thinking about in this video, we see the state of the Gentiles with the good news and the gospel. And this is how Paul describes them. But now in Christ Jesus, you who were once far away have been brought near through the blood of Christ. For he himself is our peace, who has made the two one and has destroyed the barrier, the dividing wall of hostility, by abolishing in his flesh the law with all its commandments and regulations. Brought near. So at one time excluded, separated from the Messiah, but in the good news of Jesus, brought near. The old temple, based on the earlier tabernacle in the Old Testament, which was the tent that the people had in their wilderness journey in the Exodus, had all sorts of symbolism, but one of the significant symbolisms was that the Holy of Holies, the place that symbolized God's presence, was behind several barriers, a place that hardly anybody could ever go into, and then only on one day a year. And there were the different courts that kept people further and further away. The last court was the court of the Gentiles, as far away as you could be. That was as near as a Gentile could get to the place that symbolized God's presence, but brought near through the Lord Jesus in the crucifixion. The veil in the temple, the big curtain, the huge curtain that blocked off the Holy of Holies, was ripped in two from top to bottom, and it was a picture that when Jesus died, it is possible for anyone, even the Gentiles, even me, to come near to God. But not only brought near, but brought together. For he himself is our peace, who has made the two one and destroyed the barrier. Verse 15, his purpose was to create in himself one new man out of the two there being the Gentiles and the Jews, thus making peace, and in this one body to reconcile both of them to God through the cross, by which he put to death their hostility. The Gentiles had very little to do with the Jews, thought of them as a rather peculiar bunch of people who had a God that you couldn't see. Everybody else had gods that you could see. In the Greek philosophies and in the Roman Empire, there were gods everywhere. But you couldn't see this God of the Jews. And they were a very weird people, it was thought. The Jews' view of the Gentiles was not strong either. Well, it was strong in point of fact, so strong that if a Jew married a Gentile, a funeral was held for the Jew. That's the end of that Jew as a functioning person, because they have now joined the great unwashed. So there was plenty of hostility and dislike and detachment. But in the good news of Jesus, they've been brought together. And that was the purpose of the good news of Jesus, so that although historically Israel had been the people of God, called to bear testimony to him through those centuries, from Jesus onwards, people of all nations are particularly and equally welcomed in. It is a story of inclusion, and you and I can be included in the inclusion. And it's more than that. It's a story of belonging, not welcomed in as just guests, a privilege that we have open house for the Gentiles. Consequently, you are no longer foreigners and aliens, but fellow citizens with God's people and members of God's household. So God does not just bring us in as guests. He brings us in as citizens. These Gentiles who were separated in a hopeless way, traversing through the world to nothing, have been brought into the household of God. A place that the Jews didn't deserve to be either. And a wonderful fulfillment of God's love and promises for the world. But belonging isn't arriving. Paul goes on. Built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, with Jesus Christ himself as the chief cornerstone. In him the whole building is joined together and rises to become a holy temple in the Lord. And in him you too are being built together to become a dwelling in which God lives by his Spirit. The Gentiles who were excluded from everything have not only been brought into the household of God, but now they have purpose. They were without hope and without God. Now they are with God and with hope. Their life is part of a building process in which God is building, as it were, a temple, however, made of living stones. A temple where Jesus is the beginning of it, the cornerstone, but creating a people from everywhere that are his people, a picture that is given in the book of Revelation. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne, saying, now the dwelling of God is with men, and he will live with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. These Gentiles, who had started off without God and without hope, end up with God and with the most wonderful hope that could ever be imagined. And if you're a Gentile today, you will, like me, be grateful that Jesus came to make peace between us and God, and between us and all his people, and to bring us into the promises in which we stand, in which we live, and towards which we travel.